Thank you, Jen, and good afternoon. Thank you all for joining us today for a webinar entitled Donor Motivations for Estate Planning, How Large Legacies Are Formed. My name is Nathan Stelter. I'm the president here at the Stelter Company, and happy to be here to introduce our presenter, Tom Cullinan. Before I do, I'd like to say a few quick words about our webinar series. As an industry leader in plan giving marketing, Stelter is committed to providing innovative solutions and education for our entire industry. We're always happy to host this complimentary webinar and have a whole slate of webinars throughout the year. Earlier this year, we were fortunate to have Betty Thompson from Thompson Associates talk about keys to success of the best. We've covered philanthropic tools for baby boomers and even integrating charitable and family legacies. After today and Tom's presentation, we still have on the docket Mike Degenhart from Penn State with tips for integrating plan giving into campaigns. Former national board members Jay Steenheisen teaching us how to build strong partnerships between planned and major gift officers, and Kathy Sheffield, who will teach us how to uncover donor assets. You can register for any of these or look up our old archived webinars on our website at www.stelter.com/webinars. And as always, we'll be sending out invites straight to your inbox as they draw closer. Now back to today's presentation and our guest, Tom Cullinan. Tom is Senior Vice President and Regional Manager at Thompson Associates. He's also editor of the highly regarded Plan Giving Today publication. He served on the board of the National Association of Charitable Gift Planners and on the boards of his local affiliates in both Houston, Nebraska, and Washington, D.C., and is a current member of the State Planning Council of Corpus Christi, Charitable Gift Planners of Houston, and Plan Giving Council of San Antonio. Over a 27-year career in philanthropy, he and his staff have facilitated more than $1.2 billion in current and deferred plan gifts. So without much further ado, I will hand it off to Tom.
Hi, Tom. This is Jen. I think maybe you muted your phone. So if you're talking, we can't hear you. We'll give you just a minute to try to figure that out. Tom, we're still unable to hear you, so I'm guessing something's going on with your phone. So we're just going to pause for a minute. Oh, there you are.
Okay, sorry.
Okay.
All of a sudden, everything dropped,
problem.
and so now we're good. All right, thank you.
Okay.
All right. Well, I'm grateful to the Stelter Company for gathering such a nice crowd. I'm talking to you today from Corpus Christi, Texas, where we've had a unseasonable cold front come through South Texas, so the heat index is only 90 today. So hope you're all having as nice a day as we are here. Just some kind of opening comments here. A lot of people approach estate planning and the many decisions that requires as both negative and costly. Too often it's seen as something that forces people to deal with unpleasant choices. They have to deal with their past shortcomings, a lot of uncertainty, and they don't want to fail, so there's pressure. But I've found that estate planning can be quite positive, even uplifting. And as professionals, it's an exercise we get to help facilitate. So you and I can break through a lot of those negative expectations. A man named Lewis was my first charitable trust donor more than 25 years ago. He lived in California, and he had a fascinating story, which I want to relate to you. He worked as an engineer during construction of the Golden Gate Bridge. His boss, he reported directly to Joseph Strauss, who was the chief engineer on the project. Lewis was very proud that he worked on such a fine structure, but mostly because it had been one of the safest projects that were built. Back then in the 1930s, the norm was that for every $1 million spent on a bridge, they expected one death during the construction. Strauss and his team had determined that they would do better, and in fact they did. He put a doctor and a nurse on the construction wharf for the workers. He insisted that everyone wear safety belts and goggles. He invented a new type of hard hat for his workers. He fired men who were reckless show-offs or who drank alcohol on the job. Strauss even put his bridge monkeys, as he called them, on special diets to counteract dizziness. He also spent $82,000 on a safety net that was suspended under the entire length of the bridge. And they attained a really phenomenal record. Although the bridge cost $35 million, only 11 people perished on the job, 10 of them in a single unavoidable accident when a scaffold broke through the net just before the bridge opened, just days before. However, that same net saved the lives of 19 men, and those survivors named themselves members of the Halfway to Hell Club. So if I can set a little tone for this talk, I'd like to think that as professionals who facilitate the decisions of our donors and estate owners, we can provide them with a safety net of sorts, maybe even create a Halfway to Hell Club for our donors. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you a little bit about my recent experiences, things that I've seen at the planning table with estate owners. I want to talk a little bit about what we should not do as folks who work for nonprofits or professionals, how we should get into the right neighborhood to do the right things. I want to talk about profiling donors and clients based on their motivations. I can also give you some conversation starters, how to get people to open up about their estate plan, and then some signs that donors need your help and will respond if you approach them in the right way. Now we'll see if my key here will allow me to advance the slide. There we go. Of course, it went too far. So what I've seen is a fair amount of family dysfunction, which probably surprises no one. There are a lot of issues in families. We see people who are afraid to give too much too soon to their kids or grandkids. There are drug and alcohol dependencies. There are uncertainties about the stability of marriages, not only with planning clients, but with their kids. We also see people who have exceeded their own expectations regarding their health. They're doing pretty well, and their wealth. I've talked to a number of donors who get to the point where they say, you know, not only myself, but my kids have done better than we ever imagined. And so now we've got some discretionary money that we want to do something with. I also see people who are pretty distrustful of their advisors. They've always kind of, in my experience, felt nervous about going to talk to an advisor because they subject themselves to salesmanship, or it's going to cost them some money when they're talking to their attorney. They also feel like maybe they're going to be forced to do something that is against their own preferences. So there's a little bit of skepticism about talking to an advisor. So as a plan giving person, as a development officer, as a major gifts person, you can have a friendly conversation and maybe break through some of that concern about estate planning. We also see that family, the assets that are owned, sometimes it's not held in the right way. Mom and dad may have a preferred son who works in the family business. That heir may own some stock in that business or have an interest in it. Other members of the family, although they rely on that business for their well-being and their family wealth, they're not involved in the business. And so sometimes the way people have set out the ownership of their assets isn't necessarily the fair way or the right way to do so. We also see a fair number of blended families where you've got second and third marriages and kids and stepkids, and that can create some complications, especially if the two parents are trying to keep their own estates distinct within the bloodlines of the family. And people are scared about manipulation. They're worried about heirs, members of their family, neighbors who might talk them into doing something that's against their own best judgment. They're worried about losing control over their own lives and having other people come in and cause them to do things that are maybe against their own best interest. What we find is that real people come to the planning table, and so as an estate planner, especially with this charitable focus that I've had for over these many years, we want to talk to them and confront them where they are, to realize what issues they bring here. There's no cookie cutter approach to estate planning. So here's what I've found over a series of 4 years. We say that people, when they die, when their estate is activated, that everything they own and control is going to go into 3 buckets. And the 3 buckets, the way they're filled, based on 4 years of my experience with a number of nonprofits, they have allocated 72% of their assets to heirs. They have given 26% of their assets to taxes. And this is a very charitable bunch. About 2% of their estates are designated for charity. Oftentimes they have no idea that this is what they've done, but this is in fact where they stand and what they've accomplished before they come to see me. After we get done planning, this pie chart looks very different. The heirs get about the same amount, in fact slightly more, 76%, but they're able to trim their tax burden down to about 10%, and charity has gone to 14%. So I'll toggle back and forth a couple of times. Literally, they're trading tax dollars for charitable dollars, which is a noble concept. But it's also important to say, you know, if we can do something that actually gives more to our heirs and more to our favorite nonprofits, that's wonderful too. So that's essentially what I have seen at the planning table. We have a really wonderful process that we do at Thompson Associates, and allows us to see people and work with them over a series of meetings to develop this kind of a relationship, and have them sent off to their advisors to implement new plans that are much more favorable towards charity, equally favorable towards their heirs, and cuts their tax bill. Here's a summary of what that looks like. The 3 buckets before and after. You can see the differences there. In this 4-year period, one client I'd had for about 18 months, another one was about 3.5 years, and they were not contemporaneous. So it was a variety of people that I had seen. About $54 million in documentable charitable gifts, and about that much still pending that was at the attorneys when I struck these calculations. Their average amount going to charity in their estate was almost 15%, taxes reduced by $82 million, about 2/3. And of that amount going to charity, about 40% of that on average goes to the sponsoring nonprofit that brought us to talk with them. So that's kind of the dimensions of all of this. People are concerned about the legacies to their own family, but given a chance, they're going to cut their taxes, and not to zero necessarily, but if they can reduce taxes and that makes room for a charitable gift, that's what a lot of people want to do, as you no doubt are. Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Jen. We did have a question that came in based on what you were just talking about from Lori.
Okay.
And she would like to know, would you say that there's a threshold size of an estate where the arithmetic works, like what you just explained, where the charitable bucket is filled up by the tax bracket, or the charitable bucket is filled, the tax bucket is filled without diminishing the heirs bucket? So is there a threshold size of estate, I guess?
Lori, that's a really good question. No, there is no threshold. A lot of people are surprised to learn that they have income tax problems by what they own when they pass away. They have money that's going to transfer and create an income tax burden on the inheritor with an IRA or other kinds of retirement funds. And so even modest estates will encounter this same issue. And I've worked with people who have estates as small as maybe $250,000 all the way up to $100 million. And the issues are pretty much the same across the board. The question is how tax sensitive they are. And if they're tax averse, then our goal is to try to reduce that tax as much as possible. But I would not say that only talk to people who have an estate of X million dollars or larger. That doesn't go to those motivations.
Great, thanks, Tom.
Sure. So what not to do? We have the Philanthropy Initiative and the U.S. Trust Study. 88% of professional advisors say that charitable giving is a very important topic for their clients. But their clients report that only 17% of them have seen their advisors bring up the topic of charitable giving. So there's a big disconnect. The advisors think they're talking way too much about it. The clients say they didn't mention it at all. So we're talking across one another, it seems to me, between advisors and donors. So that's part of our challenge in this field, to try to break through that disconnect. That 2 out of 3 clients say their advisor completely misses the mark, that they focus on tax and technical matters. And that conversation was relevant only for about 1/4 of them. What they really want to talk about are their values, their ideals, their charitable goals, and the things that interest them. Guess what? That's what we get to do when we work for nonprofits. That's exactly the kind of conversation we want to have. And at Thompson Associates, that's literally where we go in our conversations with them. There are 4 fears that everybody has. Everyone who does estate planning faces these fears or tries to avoid them. And they are dying too soon, living too long, having an economic emergency, and encountering some physical or mental disability. Every one of us faces all 4 of those fears. Some of them are more important than others. We worry about dying before we've accomplished everything we want to do. I have one donor who is got $96 million, and his lifetime goal is to get to 100 million before he starts giving it away. I have other people who are afraid of living too long and outliving their resources and becoming a burden to their family. All of us fear that there's going to be a downdraft in the stock market, and that we lose our livelihood. And of course, physical and mental disability can be devastating to an individual and to a family, both economically and in every other way. So we all face these fears, and we have to look at them realistically. Your best donors want to be understood by you, and they will talk about their values to you if you ask them. And they'll tell you exactly what matters most to them. Give them the opening to talk about their own life, and they will. Bob Sharp Sr., who mentored me many years ago, favorite quote, and I've lost who actually he was citing here, but emotion is the river upon which logic flows. A wonderful statement. So people will listen to your logical appeals on what they should do, but it's founded on the emotion that they're feeling at the time. So we need to know that the real people who come to the planning table, they're going to have an emotional connection which will lead them down the path that you want to take them. We find that the right kinds of folks to work with, the people in the right neighborhood, if you will, have come under these 8 life situations. And none of these will surprise you, but singles that have no children and couples that have no children obviously are folks that we want to talk to and you want to talk to. Also, singles and couples that have successful children, the kids that have accumulated more than mom and dad. Mom and dad no longer feel the need to give their kids every last dollar of their estate. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the kids have enough. $5 million per child is plenty. $1 million per child is plenty. There are some people who are uncomfortable leaving a large inheritance to their kids. I don't want to turn little Susie into a trust fund baby, or I don't want to take away her incentive for working. And those who just simply feel the kids don't need a large inheritance. They're wealthy on their own. They've done just fine. They have solid jobs, or they married into wealth. We also find a fair amount of people who have a lot of wealth in unrealized income property, meaning usually family-held businesses. or appreciated assets, highly appreciated assets, whether it's real estate. I've worked with a number of original owners of Berkshire Hathaway, where their cost basis is a few dollars in a share that's trading for, hundreds of thousands. And also blended families create planning opportunities too, where structuring and dividing the estate creates some charitable opportunities and the chance to use trusts to manage their inheritances. For a nonprofit, these connections, these 9 types of relationships, show the connections that these people have to a nonprofit. So whether you're an advisor who sees this in your client or you are the nonprofit, you want to focus on the top donors, both in terms of current gifts, large major gift contributor this year, or in a cumulative measure. Mrs. Jones has given us $100 a year every year for 35 years. Obviously, that person is a top donor. Those who have made legacy gifts or designations are important. Employees, both current and retired, can be an important area to look at as far as the kind of connection that would lead to potential estate gift. Same with staff members. Those who are served by the charity. I've heard of Salvation Army and Red Cross donors whose first contact with that charity was getting a cup of coffee because they had a problem, a disaster. They remember being treated kindly and receiving charity, and so they turned themselves into a donor. Volunteers, you find that many of the people who are the most likely to give are those who also spend time at the nonprofit. The senior executives on the team are obviously important when it comes to charitable giving, and if they're not bought in and willing to make an estate gift, then you have to question how long they're going to be around. And that applies to board members, both current and former board members, and certainly the professional advisor community, perhaps indirectly, but it's important for them to know what your nonprofit is doing and how you're interacting and working with their clients, your donors. So all of those people are important to connect with and to get into the right neighborhood with. We know that affluent families, in excess of 95%, make charitable gifts in some form every year, deductible or not, to a nonprofit or to an individual who's down on their luck. We see a lot of this. And so if they're making these kinds of gifts year after year, why not also through end-of-life gifts? It seems that if you're doing this during your lifetime, perhaps you would also make something at the end of your life. The important thing here that I remember from my early training is that if you don't ask, you don't get. So go ahead and ask people. If somebody's tithing 10% of their income each year for charity, maybe they will also respond to the idea that they could tithe from their estate as well. It's another way to get into the right neighborhood. The dynamics of wealthy donors and how you can kind of profile them. There was a Chronicle of Philanthropy poll, and they segmented the people who responded to it based on this book, The 7 Faces of Philanthropy. And so they talked about these wealthy donors who they were wealthy in this aspect. They had $1 million or more in liquid net worth, and they had given a $25,000 or larger gift in at least one of the previous 3 years. And so they asked these people what their motivations were for making those kinds of gifts. And so we're talking again about the right neighborhood. Those people who give to improve the community, that major face of the 7 faces of philanthropy, more than a fourth of them are communitarians. Those who give for religious reasons, the devout, 21% of people generally who give to nonprofits. What we might consider the typical planned gift donor, the one who is the investor type, gives with one eye on the tax and financial benefits, only 15%. Again, emotion is the river upon which logic flows. These people would be logical, but the emotion is going to drive it more so for 85% of people. The folks who like to throw social functions for charity and enjoy doing that, your event attendees, socialites, 10.8% of the donors have that primary motivation. The people who benefited from the charities they support, the Salvation Army, American Red Cross, the Grateful Patients, the folks who are grateful for their degrees from their institutions of higher education. 10.2% are repayers, and they directly have benefited and they want to give back in gratitude. Those who are just generous and empathetic people, the altruists, 9% of the population, and those who simply do it out of a family tradition, the dynasts, are 8.3%. So as you look at your own constituencies, realize that there are a number of different various motivations that are at work here. Your job is to uncover the individual motivations from the people that you're talking to. And I've found that the best way to do that is to sit across from them at the kitchen table, at the coffee table, and to have that direct conversation with them. The top express motivations that they want to meet critical needs in their community. They want to give back to society, both of those over 80%. More than 60%, they have an impact. They want to make something happen, and so they feel by giving they can accomplish that. Charities serve people in ways that government cannot. 64%. They were actually asked. 62% said, I gave because I was asked. And 62% give to set an example, sometimes for family, sometimes for neighbors. Other motivations here, they identify strongly with the cause, 62%. They give because of their religious beliefs, 57%. And then on the lower end, this is expected in my social network. I'm expected to give, or it makes good business sense to give. I want to leave a legacy, 26%. And 8%, I want to limit the amount that my heirs get, so I'm going to make a charitable gift. So as a gift officer, how do you get people to talk about their motivations? How do you get that conversation started? And I presented this to a group of attorneys and other advisors in East Texas earlier. Actually, it was earlier this year, yeah. Are you involved with other nonprofits? You know, what's important to you? Why do those other nonprofits excite you? Do you give to the same nonprofits each year? In other words, do you have a pattern, or is each year a new year and you have a charitable budget? How do you decide which ones to support? What is it that causes you to give to one and not to another? Is anyone else involved in your decisions to give? We find the planning clients that we work with at Thompson Associates, sometimes the husband makes his own decisions, the wife makes her own, and then they make some joint decisions. Another key question, are there donations that you've made that caused you either satisfaction or regret? It's a probing question that maybe will get them to open up about what's important to them. Do you give anonymously? Why? Most will tell you that they don't want additional unwanted solicitations. Others feel that they just want to be private about it. Have you ever given a non-cash gift? Important to ask. Starts that conversation about the benefits of giving appreciated assets. Do you always give the same amount every year? A lot of people are in a rut. They're stuck, and they write a check for $1,000, or they continue at their own membership level. Do you have a donor-advised fund, a foundation, or a charitable trust in place? You'd be surprised how many people have created donor-advised funds in the past decade. This is the warm hands, cold hands question. Do you want your best gifts to be made while you're alive, at your death? or well after you have passed away. I have a donor I'm working with right now who says, we want to give as much as we can during our life. I want to see the benefit of that, but I don't care. Once I'm gone, and nobody's going to remember me after I've died. Advisors will tell you this, and these can also happen to major gift officers. Your donors need help if they call up with a lot of urgency towards the end of the year. If you notice that people are giving inconsistently or to very different nonprofits each year, that they're scattered or they're not thinking clearly about what their giving is like, they can't keep track of receipts. Making repeat gifts to the same nonprofit during the year. There are some who make multiple solicitations throughout the year, and Mrs. McGillicuddy sends in a check every time for $5. That's just her way of responding to the appeal. You also see people who give inefficiently, people who have appreciated assets who keep writing checks, people who give a certain amount, but now with a higher threshold, it's no longer deductible. Maybe they should be taught about bunching their gifts so they can actually attain an income tax charitable deduction under our new tax hierarchy. I think it's important that when we approach people, not only in the first conversation, but clearly every time we meet with them, put the benefits at the top of the conversation. Let donors know what's in it for them. They always will seek advice from their family and friends because these are the people they know the best, but they may get poor advice from them. Let donors know that they can decide before it's too late. They can be in control of what happens, especially in their estate plans. Most of us don't want to make decisions because we don't know what we don't know, but yet most people also want to be in control. They want to have things happen the way they want it to happen. They can set the pace and they can get recognition for it, and a certain amount of donors want that kind of recognition. This is an old one, but a good one. They can find new ways to give more at a lower cost. Show somebody how they can give 100 shares of a popular local stock that maybe they've owned for 10 or 12 years, and how the actual out-of-pocket cost of giving those appreciated securities is lower than if they wrote a check, or that they can actually give a larger gift because of that capital gains tax avoidance. They can also assure that the money that they give is used exactly as they want. Encourage them to have a gift agreement for certain kinds of gifts. Build up an endowment over time. And this doesn't appeal to everyone, but a number of folks want to become an example for their own kids, for their grandkids, and in their larger community. So we can show them how to do that, and these benefits are very important to donors. What we try to do at Thompson Associates is to find the strategic client. We want to find the person who approaches charitable giving with purpose. There are three types of donors. There are folks who give, basically they give out of habit. So about 70% of your donors give habitually. They tend to give the same amount at the same time every year. The data are that there are about 23% of donors give for emotional reasons. They have an emotional response to a particular problem. Think about Hurricane Harvey, for example, in our neck of the woods, or certain kinds of events that prompt them to make an extraordinary gift. But the 7% of donors, the strategic donors, they want to give in response to a particular problem. And this is not about a crisis gift, but they want to solve a problem. They want to be strategic about where their money goes. These folks, we ask them three key questions. Do we have enough to live on for the rest of our lives? The second question is, how much should each of my heirs inherit? In other words, is there a limit, or do I have a target in mind? Not just every last dollar, but is there an amount? And the third question is, would I rather leave part of my estate to charity or to the government? This is the social capital question. of what you cannot give to your heirs. How do you want that to go? Do you want to control it, or are you happy just giving it to tax? Strategic donors do things very differently than tactical donors. Tactical donors, both types are very important, but the tactical donor will respond to an appeal in order to avert a crisis. You know, we're going to have to close the doors if we don't get X dollars by the end of the year. The strategic donor will have a vision for the future and won't necessarily care about those dramatic crisis type appeals. The tactical donor is concerned about obstacles in the way, things that have been identified. They want to attack those obstacles, where the strategic donor is looking towards the future. How can we grow this nonprofit? How do things look 3 to 5 to 10 years out? The tactical giver tends to be concerned more about temporary gratification. You know, let's just give $1 more this year in the campaign, where the strategic donor says, I want to have an impact that has a long residual impact. I want to have a gift that has a return on investment. I want to change the way this nonprofit is funded in order to make it more permanent. And there are also two types of people who accumulate wealth in this country. We have the terminal accumulators, who mostly are self-interested. They're motivated by a need to give. Sometimes they give out of a sense of obligation. Thinking of the gentleman that I'm working with, whose goal is to get to $100 million before he gives anything away. He's a terminal accumulator. And the other kind, the more important kind, are the instrumental ones. They are interested in helping other people. They're motivated by a want to give. They're making a sacrifice for a greater good, and that's what's key to them. About benefits, the attorneys are often very awkward about talking about philanthropy. I believe that mentioning charitable giving with a client is absolutely appropriate. Attorneys will sometimes say, gee, if I ask them about charitable giving, am I not just trying to give my own personal values and overreaching in that client relationship? Well, my answer to that is, what attorney would not discuss the marital deduction? And if you would obviously want to talk about the marital deduction to your married clients, the charitable deduction is no different at all. I think it's almost malpractice for an attorney not to talk about charitable giving in an estate planning context. So clients' motivations, we need to know what not to do. We need to get the dumb stuff out of the process. We need to approach people knowing that there's a real client coming to the planning table. Your donors that you're meeting with have concerns, have issues, and they're willing to talk to you about them if you'll just give them the opportunity. You're going to put yourself in the right neighborhoods so that you're focusing on those key donor and client types, that you're looking at those life situations that we listed earlier, and you're going to be in front of the right people who will have the motivations and the wealth to help you. And then you're going to ask them about their motivations and profile them in a friendly way to talk about what's important to them. That will guide you in uncovering that gift that they want to make. Conversation starters, hopefully you can employ some of those to get people to open up, and then look for the signs that folks need help, and will respond to suggestions that you have. We also think it's important that you put those benefits first, and always talk from a what's in it for me point of view. So from there, questions, comments,
Yes.
concerns?
Yes, absolutely. Tom, we do have a handful of questions that have come in, so we'll start with those. However, the rest of you, if you have any other questions, feel free to send those in, and we'll get through as many as we can with our remaining time. So Paula is asking, what is the process whereby a nonprofit would bring you in to help the donors? She's concerned about being perceived as being too self-serving by the heirs.
The nonprofits that hire us to come in recognize that what's really important to their donors is that they get the right kind of advice. And what a person who works for a nonprofit, whether they're a planned giving officer, a major gift officer, or president of a foundation, they have limitations. They can only do so much, and it's not proper necessarily to give advice. So where a nonprofit brings in Thompson Associates, our job is to facilitate discussions between the individuals, find out their values and objectives, and get them in the hands of their own advisors to make the changes that are necessary. We're temporarily with those folks. We do the job that the nonprofit can't do, and then at the end of that point, they go back to the relationship with the relationship manager of the nonprofit, and everything is back to normal, except they've now made a significant change in the way they're handling their estate.
Perfect, thank you. A couple more questions here too, and I think this one you did touch base on, but really, Catherine, wondering from your experience around donor-advised funds and family foundations in particular, have you found, or she's found, that most of her major donors, 50,000 plus at her organization, have their own advised funds or family foundations to whom they leave the bulk of their estate, and thus is finding better plan giving prospect at lower income levels. Have you seen some of that as well in your work?
Yes, and people who do that, they are thoughtful donors. They may not have a budget, but they have a pattern in place. They've made a strategic decision. And one of those top 7% of the donors out there, that's exactly the kind of person that you want to be working with, especially for estate gifts. For whatever reason, they tend to be those who are instrumental donors, who are trying to make impactful gifts, and that's why they set up a donor-advised fund, or they've started a family foundation.
Okay, we have a question from Eli, and he's wondering, Tom, if you could explain bunching.
Bunching? Some people call it bundling. The idea is that if you have donors who aren't giving at a level that will allow them the income tax charitable deduction, now that we have a much higher threshold in the standard deduction, the concept is bundle or bunch your charitable giving all into this year, maybe for 3 or 4 years worth of gifts. If somebody normally gives $8,000 a year, and you can convince them to make a $32,000 gift this year to kind of prepay the following 3 years, then they can qualify for an income tax charitable deduction. Otherwise, if they just continue giving the $8,000 a year, won't be enough to claim a charitable deduction. It'll be included in their standard deduction. And some people like that idea. They like having a deduction. They like taking money out of the pockets of Uncle Sam. And so if you have that kind of a donor who's tax sensitive, that's a concept that may work for them.
Perfect. Yeah, we've seen that as well. Obviously, with the new legislation, more folks looking at bunching. So, a couple other really good questions here. Actually, Marge has a question around, and I know we tried to look at this under the U.S. Trust study, and we tried to look at this in our 2013 study with the National Association of Estate Planners and Counsels. But in your experience, are there ways nonprofits can encourage attorneys to emphasize charitable giving more than they already do?
You know, when I was a frontline fundraiser, starting off a long time ago, I made it a point to spend about 10% of my time getting out of the office and trying to meet with 1 or 2 advisor types in the community every week. I wanted those advisors, especially estate planning attorneys, to know what we were doing at my university and how we were going to be working with their donors. It would only be usually a 10 to 15 minute meeting. Sometimes it was a cup of coffee. Sometimes it was just a brief conversation in their lobby. But I wanted to show them the materials that we were sending out And I think that personal relationship, just like it's important with donors, it's important with the professional community as well. And any way you can gin up that kind of relationship, to me, is worthwhile. I have a colleague who writes a column in the local newspaper and includes charitable giving topics. And over the course of his career, he's become kind of the go-to guy when the professional community has questions about charitable giving. You want to be known in that community, and you want to be respected for your knowledge. And since if you're not a member of the Bar Association, well, it's a good entree to get in front of folks who are members of the Bar Association, and to know that you've got some knowledge and you've got some expertise, and that you're treating their clients well.
I love that, Tom. And yeah, I'd actually add to that too. I think we've seen the shift with the advisors too. It's really very much more about the quality of the relationship with the advisor as opposed to quantity. I know for years and years, looking back 10, 15 years in this industry, people would send out mass marketing to advisors that was relatively generic and didn't really talk about the organization or do much to build a relationship. And even our mutual colleague, Johnny Hayes, I know has done some informal kind of polling and surveying of sorts. And, building those one-on-ones is much more critical to trying to find everybody with a certain title or designation in your yellow pages, if they still have them. But
exactly,
I think that's great. And I would also say, we've seen too, if you're building those relationships, really focusing on the impact you're having too, and the great work you're doing. I mean, that stuff just goes such a long way. So I'll pass it back to Jen. I know she's got a couple more questions that have popped up since we've been talking.
Okay, thanks, Nathan.
Yes, we have a question. You talked about some types of people that would make good prospects for plan giving, and this viewer is wondering if you can clarify how blended families might be a good prospect for plan giving.
People who have blended families, kids from different prior marriages, I have found that they bring their own assets into the marriage. They bring their own thoughts, maybe wealth, maybe family wealth, and they want to keep that within their own bloodline. So a husband and wife, maybe with their blended family, has 5 kids, 3 are hers, 2 are his, none on their own. They're going to have to structure something to make sure that the 3 kids from the one spouse receive the inheritances from that spouse, and the other 2 receive money that, at least at the time of the marriage, they want to keep that separated or segmented. And so those planning opportunities sometimes create charitable gifts. They may be in a position where, if it's income from a family business or it's royalties from an oil lease, perhaps that money can be structured in such a way that there's an income provided to those kids, or there's a remainder provided to those kids, and that income provides a.
Terrific. Yep, still have a couple more minutes here, so we've got some good questions queued up. Our good friend Johnny, not Johnny Hayes, different Johnny, has a question here. Do you have a specific process or exercise to help the donor determine what amount of inheritance will help their heirs and not hurt them? Is Tom still there? I think Tom's still on mute. Did we lose you there? Here's something.
Here we go. Okay, I hear your voice now.
Oh. Did you get the question, Tom, or do you want me to repeat that?
I missed it. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. The question was around, do you have a specific process or exercise to help the donor determine what amount of inheritance will help their heirs and not hurt them?
What we do is we start off by asking people what their values and objectives are, and so we quiz them rather extensively about what's important to them. Once we've determined their values and they've kind of set out issues related to how much the kids should have, what's their tax sensitivity, how much is the right amount for their heirs, what's their charitable goal, if any, then we'll look at their net worth and we'll try to look for our assets that create planning opportunities, appreciated assets. We'll look at hidden taxes that they want to eliminate or scrub out of their estate, and only then will we make recommendations to them. So we take a pretty deliberate approach in uncovering what's important to people before we make suggestions.
Okay. Heather has a question and also some comments for you, Tom. First, she wants to thank you for sharing your valuable knowledge. And she said she couldn't help but notice that you have the FCEP designation. And she's also become familiar with the CSPG certification. She's wondering, do you recommend any particular programs to help fundraisers increase their expertise in plans giving? Both of those designations are important. In my view, any kind of education is good. So whether you're going to national or regional conferences every year, whether you seek a credential or not, expose yourself to that kind of learning and attain those credentials. They're always helpful when you're dealing with other professionals. My personal view is that if we don't stay current in our field, it'll pass us by. We're required at Thompson Associates to renew our FCEP every 3 years. And that's a good discipline to have, to make sure that it's not more than 3 years since we've taken a hard look and spent a week studying what it takes to attain that credential. I've also, when I first started, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, we designated 10% of our planned giving budget at the university towards continuing education. And so that paid for me to go to an annual conference, to subscribe to publications that would keep me current, to buy books that I could read, and to other kinds of subscriptions that would allow me to every week, every month, throughout the year, improve my knowledge. And so however you see that at your own shop, at your own desk, by all means take advantage and spend the money and the time in order to stay on top of things.
Perfect, thank you. I guess just maybe one or two quick more questions here as we're ending towards our time together. There's a question around community foundations. In particular, Lauren was wondering, do you have a favorite way to partner with community foundations around estate planning conversations?
Community foundations are such a great resource because they tend to have these broader conversations about families and legacies in the community. So they're a natural place to go, and they provide a lot of infrastructure for people who are engaged in these kinds of discussions. They also have the resources and maybe programs and methods in place that they make it really easy for donors, and sometimes easy for the nonprofit as well. There are certain parents who want to make sure that their kids and grandkids learn something about charitable giving, and the community foundation becomes a great way that after mom and dad have passed away, that the kids can then advise on those community foundation funds for the next 10 years, for example. So they're a convener. They bring the conversation together. They also are in touch with what's going on in the community that they serve. And they can actually provide, with certain families with specific interests, maybe create new initiatives in that community that didn't exist before, but it's a particular interest to a donor or to a family, and they'll they'll bring that to bear and create new outreach and new support for the community. So I think community foundations are outstanding. I'm a big proponent of them, and because they know how to articulate this conversation as well.
Well, Tom, we are almost at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and leave that be our last question and wrap things up here. Thank you so much, Tom, for spending the last hour with us. And thank you to our attendees who joined the call today. We had close to 400 of you spend the last hour with us, so thanks a lot. If you had a question, we did have a couple questions we didn't get to. If you have a question that you really would like the answer to, Tom has offered his email address up. You can see that on the screen. Feel free to reach out to him personally. If you have a question about the webinar series or really anything that we spoke about today or the webinars coming up, you can contact Nathan or myself. And if you have questions about Stelter's products or services or programs that we offer, please visit us at stelter.com. Finally, a question I got a lot, and I get a lot, is can we have the handouts, and is there a recording? And the answer to that is yes. I'm recording it right now, so barring any technical difficulties, we'll have that recording, and I will have Tom's slides available for you on our website at stelter.com/webinars. Usually takes me a couple of days to get those up there, so for sure they'll be available for you by Monday. So look for those. Thanks again, Tom, for spending your last hour with us. We really appreciate your expertise and your time. And thanks, Nathan, for being here.
Thank you, Jen, and thank you, Nathan. It's been very good. I appreciate all the care you put into this, and I hope it was beneficial to everyone.
Absolutely. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.